Stay tuned until the end of this video for a brief tutorial on how to use Now for the portal tutorial. There are many kinds of portals on the game, but I usually use the Re-Rail portal, which is available on the download station, because this one has a few more options. So anyway, to use the portal, first click on Properties, which is the question mark symbol on the Objects menu. Now at first there's an option for Re-Rail, Derail Trains that is selected. And it says wait for 5 real minutes before re-railing a train or deleting a train. I usually choose deleting the train because when it re-rails the train, sometimes the driver gets confused and just stays there. So it's usually better to delete it, especially if you have more trains coming out of the portal anyway. There's also an option for accept all trains or accept trains matching specific criteria. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, when it says real minutes, it means actual 60 seconds. Because in the game, you can choose to have time go faster in driver. But it's not going to be using that time. It's going to be using actual time to determine when it's going to do the thing you told it to do. Now, if you select accept trains matching specific criteria, this menu appears. Here you can choose what types of trains it'll either re-rail or delete. For example, you can choose the vehicle name, and if you choose that, it'll only choose a certain train that's already on the route. In other words, you won't be able to use this for new trains coming out of the portal, just the ones that already exist currently when you set up the portal. If you click the big plus sign, this menu will appear that has a list of the trains that are currently on the route. You can just select the ones that you want it to either re-rail or delete, depending on which option you selected. And if any of those train cars that are currently on the route derail, it'll either re-rail or delete them, depending on which option you selected earlier. Now, if you choose by vehicle type, you're not limited to just the trains that are currently on the route. You can choose any type of train. For example, if I were to click on the Acela Express Power Car Front, then anytime any Acela Express Power Car Front derails on this route, it'll either re-rail or delete it, depending on which option you selected. If you choose by driver, then this list will appear. A list of all the drivers that are currently available on the game, and drivers that you've downloaded. Now, when you click on a specific driver, anytime a train derails that is being driven by that driver, it'll either re-rail or delete it, depending on the option you selected. If you click on accept all trains, it'll derail or delete any train that derails on this map, depending on the option you selected. You only need to program one portal to derail or delete the trains, as far as I know. I think there was one time where I programmed 2 portals to delete the train and it caused a glitch. So I would only program one portal to delete or derail the train, just to be on the safe side. There's also the option to produce new trains. Now, right now it says wait for 10 real minutes before producing the first train, then produce every subsequent train after 15 minutes. That basically means that as soon as you start the route, when 10 actual minutes pass, the first train will be produced, and then 15 minutes after that train is produced, the next train will be produced. Now, I usually tell it to wait for 1 minute before producing the first train, just because it's faster. Now, you'll have to experiment to figure out the proper amount of time the portal should wait before producing a train, because it can vary depending on what types of trains you have producing. What type of trains are being produced, and well, there's pretty much a lot of variables you have to consider. So I usually just, based on trial and error, decide what amount of minutes will pass before a train is produced. For some stupid reason, in Trainz a New Era, there's a limit to how many trains the portal can produce. There was no limit on Trainz 12, but for some reason there is on Trainz a New Era. If you go over this limit, an error will appear that says, an error occurred while trying to edit this product. And you'll basically lose all the trains that you told it to produce since that error appeared. So your only option will be to delete the portal and put a new one up and start over from scratch. So I would recommend saving the game after every portal saving the game after every train you tell the portal to produce. That way, if this error occurs, just exit out of the game without saving and come back to it, and the last train you produce will still be there. I really don't know why this error occurs, and I tried researching it, and no one seems to have the answer for this. Someone asked the question of how to fix this error on the Trainz discussion forums, but didn't get an answer. Someone else says that they found the solution, but they don't seem to be willing to share it, because someone requested that he share what he did to get this error to stop appearing, but he never responded. So I guess we'll just have to deal with it. Now, I found a slight solution for this. Basically, I just put 2 portals on the track and tell the second portal to produce the other trains I wanted it to produce. You can choose to produce a train randomly from the list or sequentially from the list. If you choose randomly, then it'll randomly select a train from the list of trains that you have. If you choose sequentially, it'll start with the first train that's on the list and then just go down one train at a time until it gets to the bottom of the list, and then it'll go back to the top again when it's finished. I usually choose randomly because it makes it seem more realistic. If you click on the 10 minutes, this menu will pop up that gives you the option to type how many minutes you think should pass before the first train is produced. Now, if you click Add New Consist on the bottom, this box will appear. You can either click on the plus sign to add each locomotive and train car one by one, but in my opinion this takes too long, so I usually just click on the Add Existing Save Consist rule, but we'll get to that in the future. Right now, I'm just going to show you what happens when you click on the plus sign. This list of locomotives and rolling stock appears, and you simply click the one that you want to add. You can add as many cars as you want, and you can also choose if it's forward or reversed. If it's reversed, that just basically means it will be rotated when it comes out of the portal. However, I've noticed that some train cars derail when you put them in reverse coming out of the portal. especially when attached to a forward moving vehicle. I have no idea why this happens, and it's really annoying. Now, just for an example, I'm going to choose the Acela Express Power Car Front and select it. The train won't come out of the portal without a driver, or it'll come out but it just won't go anywhere. So you also have to click Add a Driver to Consist, and this menu will pop up with all the drivers that are available. I'm not sure what the green highlighted ones are. I think those are payware drivers that you have to purchase, or maybe they're drivers that you've downloaded to let you know the difference between the ones that are already on the game and the ones you downloaded. Either way, when you select a driver, it'll appear underneath the train after you add it. You can also rename a driver by clicking on the driver's name and then just typing whatever name you want to put in it. The driver has now been renamed. To teach you how to get the driver to do something when it comes out of the portal, I'll use this warehouse for an example. This is called Warehouse Small. When you put it on the ground, it'll become Warehouse Small 1 because the game automatically puts a number behind the name of something, unless you change the name manually by clicking on the properties or the question mark button and clicking on the object. I'll just leave it as Warehouse Small 1 for now, since I'm probably just going to delete this after the video is finished anyway. Of course, there has to be a way for the driver to be able to get to the place you want him to go to from the portal. Otherwise, he'll just get stuck there and a message will appear saying no path to selected destination. So of course you have to have a track attached to it somehow. It doesn't have to be directly attached to the portal. There just has to be a way to get from the portal to the destination by track. To give the driver a message, click on the two small arrows on the bottom left section of the message area. A list of all the available messages on this route will show up. You can make this list longer or shorter depending on what you want, and I'll show you how to do that eventually. But for now, to get the train to drive to the warehouse, highlight Drive To, and then another drop down menu will appear with all the things that the train can drive to on this route. And then highlight Warehouse Small 1, which is the warehouse we're trying to get the train to drive to. Another drop down menu will appear showing you all the locations the train can approach this object from. In this case, it's only track 1 because there's only one track on the warehouse. But for example, on the oil refinery, there's a crude oil drop off and a fuel pickup, so you can choose either one of those two tracks. Then click track 1. The warehouse icon now appears in the message area. The driver will now drive to this warehouse as soon as it comes out of the portal. Now, there's another message you have to give the train when approaching an industry, and that is the load command or the unload command, depending on what you want the train to do. Otherwise, the train will just approach the warehouse and then stop. You need to tell it what it is supposed to do once it gets there. So we'll tell it to load when it gets to the warehouse. Actually, now that I think about it, the Acela Express cannot carry general goods, so I need to give it at least one freight car that can. If a freight car that does not carry general goods is asked to load at a place that produces general goods, it's just going to stop briefly and then ignore the command and keep going. So I'm going to give it one box car, just for the example. Okay, I'm just going to choose a random box car from the large list of box cars I have. Okay, now it has something that can carry general goods. I'm also going to show you how to make it so that the freight car is already loaded when it comes out of the portal. However, it should be noted that if the train car can carry more than one type of product, it'll just choose a random product from that list to load. There is another instant load command where you can choose which product from which tier inside the freight car will it actually load it with. But that same product will be used for all cars on the train. Or, for example, if you select product 0, it'll just load product 0 of each freight car. You can add as many consists as you want as long as you don't exceed the limit and cause that error to appear in the game. Still not sure why that only happens on Trainz: A New Era. Can't find any help on how to fix that. Either way, to add a new consist, just click Add New Consist, and another consist list will appear. To add an existing saved consist, just click on Add Existing Saved Consist. I usually use this method because it's a lot faster. I make a consist, then I save it, then I just tell the portal to produce that saved consist. And you can actually delete the consist afterwards, and the portal will still remember the list of train cars you told it to produce. When you click Add an Existing Saved Consist, a list of all of the consists that you made, as well as the ones that you downloaded and the ones that are currently on the game, will appear, and you can just choose whichever consist you want. Now, when making a consist, I usually put the locomotive in the consist as well, just because it's faster that way. Okay, I'm gonna choose this BNSF well consist, which is one I created that has a few BNSF locomotives pulling some well freight cars. Now, some of the well cars I downloaded from Trainz Pro routes derail when coming out of the portal occasionally, especially if it's attached to a spine car. I'm not sure why that is. For some reason, attaching well cars to spine cars causes them to derail sometimes. Attaching Trainz Pro routes well cars with jointed rail well cars also sometimes causes them to derail. Now, just like the last one, you have to add a driver to the consist or it won't do anything when it comes out of the portal. And of course you have to give it messages as well. Okay, if you want to have the well cars loaded when they come out of the portal, you can use the instant load command. If you highlight instant load, it'll give you the option to load all, which will load all of the well cars in the consist. Load random, which I'm guessing just means it'll randomly choose some of the cars to load and leave some of them empty. And then there's also one for load all non-double stack, which means it'll just put a container on the bottom of the well car. Now, there are a few issues with this, especially on the well cars I downloaded from Trainz Pro routes. Sometimes it'll only put one 20-foot container on the bottom and nothing on top, because it chooses a random container, and if it happens to choose one that's not compatible with the other, then it just won't work correctly. Sometimes it chooses one container on top and nothing on the bottom, for the same reason I mentioned earlier. And sometimes it has one container floating above the other container, because on one of them it chose a standard cube container, and on the top one I think it chose a high cube container. There's not really much I can do about that. It was the game's decision to load those. If you want to edit which messages become available, click on the Edit Session Rules icon, which is on the top left area of the Surveyor menu. Then click on Driver Command and click on Edit. This menu will pop up with all the list of driver commands that are on the game, as well as the ones you've downloaded. You can click on the check mark to make one that's not available, and then you can click out of the check mark to make it no longer available. And when it's not available, that means that you can't select it when you're in driver. But if you want it to be available again, you can always click on the check mark later on. Now, when the train is done with all its messages, I usually just tell it to go to another portal, one that isn't already programmed to produce trains. The reason why I have to have a separate portal for producing trains and one for consuming trains is because there's only one track to the portal. There might be a situation where a train tries to go into a portal, but it can't because one's coming out of the portal, and then they both get stuck. So I have two portals, one producing the trains and another one consuming them. Now, I don't really have to change anything about the portal except its name, so that I know which one to tell the trains to drive to. So when I click on the properties, all I do is change the name of the portal. The settings it's automatically set to consume trains when you open it. As you can see, it's already set to consume trains and accept all trains. These are the settings I normally use when I wanted to consume the train. There's not really much of a reason to have it only set to accept trains matching specific criteria, because if a train arrives at the portal and it doesn't meet that criteria, it'll probably just get stuck since it can't drive back out. And the reason it can't drive back out will probably be because there's another train behind it that also wants to go to that portal. Now I'm going to tell it to drive to Re-Rail Portal 2. Portals are considered an industry, so they will be under the drive to command. Sometimes when you add an industry to the route, it's not available in the menu right away. To fix this, you have to exit out of the portal menu by clicking on the check mark and then just coming back in. Usually it'll refresh and that object will be available again. I have no idea why this happens. It's a really annoying glitch, but still they have not fixed it. So just exit out of the menu and come back if the industry you want to select isn't available. After exiting out of the menu and coming back, Re-Rail Portal 2 is now available, and I can tell it to drive to that. Never tell the train to drive to a portal that's only set to produce trains, because it'll probably derail when it gets to it, or it'll just get stuck and cause a bunch of other glitches. It'll now drive into the portal and disappear after it finishes its commands. But you don't have to worry about running out of trains, because it'll produce it again later on. There are certain combinations of train car types that will usually derail when coming out of the portal. Those combinations are short train cars attached to long train cars of different sizes or types attached to each other, a forward-facing train car attached to a rear-facing train car, a low-detail train car attached to a high-detail train car, a low-resolution train car attached to a high-resolution train car, a scripted train car attached to a non-scripted train car, a jointed rail train car attached to a built-in train car, a passenger car attached to a freight car, especially if that passenger car is attached between two freight cars, train cars with unrealistic physics attached to train cars with realistic physics. For example, that New Jersey Transit bi-level car. I don't know why, but the game thinks it weighs 0 tons. And it has an engine specification, so whenever you try to move the train, the passenger car will push really hard on the couplers until they break and cause the train to derail. I still don't know why this happens. First of all, I don't know why the game thinks it weighs 0 tons. Like, doesn't the person who creates the train cars tell the game how much it weighs, or does the game estimate it on its own? And if the game estimates it on its own, why does it think it's 0 tons? Even when loaded with passengers. I don't understand why this happens. But yeah, if a train car with unrealistic physics is attached to one with realistic physics, it'll cause the couplers to break and the train to derail. Articulated well cars attached to non-articulated well cars. Articulated well cars from one author attached to articulated well cars from another author. For example, well cars from Trainz Pro routes attached to well cars from Jointed Rail. Rear-facing articulated well cars attached to forward-facing articulated well cars. Articulated well cars attached to spine cars. Non-articulated well cars attached to spine cars. Spine cars attached to... It's usually... basically, one articulated type attached to another articulated type. That'll usually cause them to derail. Articulated passenger cars, especially the 2GV duplex. I don't know why, but every time this train comes out of the portal, the entire center section of the train derails. And the front half of the train is driving very slowly on its own without a driver, and the rear section is following along with a driver. If a section of a train is missing but there's a locomotive in the end or anywhere in the section that didn't derail, it'll usually put a driver in that section, but not in the front section because that one derailed. So yeah, the TGV duplex. Some articulated passenger cars will work though. For example, I've never had a problem getting a tram to come out of a portal.